Welcome to the new Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show. It's Sunday, January 23rd, 2022. I'm here with Dean Kevin, who's going to share his real side experiences with us. Welcome, Kevin.
This real side experience would find me on the second floor of my recreated house. As we know, the personal self, the consciousness, all the decided and agreed to ideas that make up its construction, which then effect into our creational, simulated experience, generally is represented by a house on the real side. For, of course, the real awareness is our actual beingness state, part of the isness, everything, true reality, and really then, creation is but a secondary area that the awareness resides within and has the experiences it does for its ears, recognitional, comparison purposes. It's as though, in the everything isness, we have constructed our consciousness, our effected illusion within it, isolated fragments or parts, some things that we can use as a comparison to recognize the everything. For if what we experience is something, it can't be the everything life is. Creation then affords us these experiences of that which isn't this completeness, everything true reality. And so, very much with our little world of constructed simulation illusions that stem from the consciousness that have us then in these isolated, unreal realities aside from the isness, to represent it as a house standing within this isness, everything reality, would be appropriate. And with most individuals, they would effectively never leave their personal self, consciousness houses, to venture outside into the unknown of life, the isness everything that lies aside from it. The house would always be double layered, a ground floor and a top floor. The ground floor representing the personal self, but more so that which the individual is conscious of, and what with most being rather one-dimensional or physical level focused, so very little of their multi-dimensional nature will become known to them. Indeed, most will be unaware of their multi-dimensional, multi-vehicle effecting into multi-life levels nature. For, of course, to explore anywhere beyond that which we have come to know, we must first be aware of it. As everything stems from decision, so must decision be made to explore our multi-dimensional consciousness nature. If I want to explore the woodlands nearby. I need be first aware that it is there. I need the references for its existence. Then I make the decision. I place the intent, and with experience, always reflecting intent placement and decision, so the exploration of what was previously unknown to the personal self be so. On the physical, it is so that action needs be taken, working within the mechanics of a consciousness agreed to, distance and time, that now I am aware of the woodlands, I must work within these decided consciousness limitations. I must travel there, traverse a distance that in reality doesn't exist, as everything is, and contained within every moment of its true reality. So where would there in actuality be the need for travel, of point-to-point motion? These ideas of distance and time only exist in simulation, but are a necessity, as our comparisons between this isness everything and that which isn't, all the ideas of creation, including time and distance. For really, the further from the isness everything reality simulation is, the greater the comparison can be, and the more likely recognition of the is can be so. On the real side, we are only as limited as we decide, and our explorations of our multi-dimensional nature, as we have the references that have us aware of these exploratory possibilities, can be as laborious as the physical level of motion, of traversing the illusion of a distance, of utilizing portals, spacecraft, etc., or we can simply pop in and out of the specific locations we wish to see, or that which the real awareness wants to show the personal self. For the real awareness, part of all real awareness, that is a part of this isness everything, is through all consciousness that effects all simulation, all the life levels, from all the body vehicles. And so it's rather the case that the real awareness, with its overview of everything creational, like being in a room full of every created idea displaying on multiple TVs, can rather select the specific idea the personal self is to be shown, and however that expresses into simulation anywhere throughout the multi-dimensionality of creation, as effected from all consciousness, and rather insert its personal self into the simulation, and the personal self then is afforded that which makes the most sense for it to be shown, in conjunction with the personal self intent and agreement to want and have decided to see more than it currently knows and is aware of, and to effect a personal self into a simulation is to agree with the ideas that have the personal self thus inserted. Generally a case of simply agreeing with the consciousness that as we do so, we step into the overall simulator arena that is effected from the overall consciousness that our consciousness is a part of. And as we are multi-dimensional, as we are everything in actuality simultaneously, the specific ideas, the vehicles that correspond with the affected areas we wish to explore can be utilized, as all ideas will house this overall awareness, as all ideas were created through a consciousness that is animated by this all alive awareness. And it's a case of then viewing through a specific idea vehicle that isolated experience within the particular target area can be explored. From an everything real awareness position into an isolated view, as awareness is placed within a specific idea vehicle. As we agree with any idea, so we are encapsulated within its simulated effects. And as I was saying, the first floor of the houses that represent the consciousness will be that which the personal self is conscious of, more than the physical arena, and the second floors will be the multi-dimensional other parts of the self effected into the various life levels, and according to the individual dictates the extent of their awareness of their multi-dimensional nature. If they are isolated with their focus just on the first floor, or if they are readily accessing the second floor in addition. And as everything starts on the real side, the other dimensions of the self, every idea, decision, and agreement, as the representation goes, everything then must feature first on the second floor, then filter and impact the physical as it will do, if the agreements, choices, decisions are maintained. Really then, the entirety of the consciousness effected overall simulator would be contained within each individual house, for every consciousness is a part of every other consciousness which affects the simulator and its multiple life levels. And so every individual has their individualized consciousness representing house, but all houses rather are interconnected, as the consciousness overall affects the overall simulator. So various individuals, creatures and beings can manifest in our houses, as a consciousness overall that affects an overall simulator stadium is rather then akin to an open computer game world where no one is inaccessible to any other. The only factor would be what additional creations and choices within this arena dictates ease of interaction in regards to the illusions of time and distance, which can have species operating at different corners of the creational realm, where it's necessary to then travel vast distances, all according to consciousness agreement that anything is a necessity, that these species can engage with each other, etc. On the real side, as I said earlier, these decided distance limitations and obstacles don't apply unless we decide that they do. Rather like a computer game where to find someone on the physical, we have to traverse a distance to meet with them. But some games have features where you can instantly teleport to a friend's location, and the real side rather is this way, that through agreement with others we can instantly latch onto them, the idea that their created self represents, and we find ourselves in their presence. For really, as all consciousness is interwoven and affects this overall simulator arena, this already is agreement that binds all consciousness. And then, as I said, it depends on what additional agreements are present as to ease of contacting directly with others to enter their simulation, as individuals can isolate themselves in simulated illusion, especially on the real side, that unless we have agreement, consciously or subconsciously, that we can feature, we rather are closed out from it, and all we can do is simply observe them and their created illusions from the real awareness overview position. And so, with individuals locked into the consciousness, they can explore their multi-dimensional nature if they so decide to not be so rigidly limited in what of their multi-dimensionality they place their focus. They can then move freely throughout their consciousness representing house, but they are still resigned, however, to the overall consciousness which theirs is a part of, and how it has decided to have been constructed. And the overall consciousness has rather been moulded according to dark force controlling reptilian design, to effect then an overall simulator according to the controller's desires, as agreement has rather been extended throughout all consciousness that allows the control of it, and the control and restriction to continuously be applied and made more so. if you agree with an individual who has a controlling, intent-orientated consciousness, you agree with the installing of these ideas into your game. Your game is then effected consequently. You have in reality decided to experience the impact of a consciousness that is inclined to want to control you, and now in addition must further agreements be installed as to if you will be controlled or not, as nothing can be simulated, experienced, without agreement ideas in the consciousness that it be so. A character in a game can't destroy my character unless the programmed idea construction is such that this is possible, and this is according to a kind of agreement contract between the participants involved with any interaction. And so, over eons of lifetimes, have the controllers successfully not only constructed their consciousness of intent and thrust it into the experience of all, generally by virtue of an open arena of simulator stadium which dictates you rather have to deal with all participants, and however they have decided to build their consciousness, but they have managed to get the overall consciousness to agree to the controller's power over them, and so the corresponding overall effect follows: a controlled simulator overall experience, with the controllers able to manage and alter the consciousness as they see fit through various technological and subconscious subliminal means, as this would fall within the agreement permissions they have, that effectively they can do anything they want with any individual, and their consciousness, individual or collective. This also has extended to the controller's ability to apply a kind of cyberspace overlap filter which obscures to a great extent the overall simulator as it actually is, a simulator that, due to the restriction of the consciousness of ideas that effect it, so this escalating restriction expresses as a simulator deteriorating and going into a darkness. The simulator throughout the life levels is shrouded in this darkness, but a darkness that can only be seen, if not viewed through, the perceptions of body vehicles that are effected from a consciousness that is dark force managed in such a way that this darkness, the simulator as it actually is, can't be seen. It can only be seen as it actually is, either through a consciousness that hasn't been perceptually manipulated, as many alien species can see this darkness, including the controlling reptilians, or seen from a position aside from the manipulated consciousness, that being the real awareness view, And so for those who remain with the consciousness, even if they are open and intended to explore its entirety, if it is a consciousness that has these applied additional filters and overlaps, they may never see the simulator, the life levels of it, as they actually are, and that which is actually taking place within it, this darkness enveloping it all, and various other additional features also that may be obscured through these applied overlap filters. The representation of getting aside from a consciousness where these filters obscure simulator actualities would be represented then by leaving the personal self consciousness representing house, and from there everything is available for the personal self to be shown through a real awareness that is through all consciousness and can see all that is effected from it, absent of any consciousness manipulation that would limit the view of what's taking place. For I would find myself on the second floor of my house, my personal self-consciousness, in the company of a group of individuals, including Peter, my father. Although, as I have mentioned before, the guides have a tendency to assume the forms of older siblings and parents, and very often it is my grandfather or father's form that the guides will adopt. And always the isness standing signatures that the guides have, regardless of their outward forms, is a telltale indication that these forms are being used by the guides, a determining of that which animates the outward forms through a real awareness that is a part of the isness reality and can read those beings, such as the guides. Guides that not only are a part of the isness, as every being is, but that have a recognition of it also, and this recognition and is standing rather has a readable essence about it that the real awareness can discern. And as on previous real side experiences, this situation was similar in that the house was bulging and shifting as though struggling to maintain its integrity under increasing stresses. Sometimes such experiences indicate an altering of the consciousness in ways that more so align the personal self with the real awareness intent, house alterations and adjustments, etc. But in this case, and on a number of experiences with a similar house heaving and bulging phenomena, my impressions are that, as all houses represent the consciousness that are a part of all consciousness that effect into the overall simulator, and as all consciousness is rather overladen with the burden of too much by way of restricting ideas agreed with. It's like each individual computer or consciousness is rather struggling with the data of every idea file it contains, and thus impacting adversely the overall affected simulator that it goes through its final cycle of decay. And although we might be stepping aside gradually from agreement with the consciousness, and ultimately we would endeavour to stand indifferent to it and not resigned to its effects, until we reach that point, we are rather ensnared in creation. And should we remain in creation when the simulator does implode, if we haven't fully released the idea taplines of the consciousness, we rather are caught up in it, as we really have decided to experience this, therefore. And so, every house representing a consciousness is tied to the simulator it affects, and should we remain attached and sitting in our consciousness houses, or even with a single idea being enough to hold us resigned to this creation, we will be caught up in the simulator implosion, for we always decide our experience, and the consciousness is the engine room of our choices and decisions effected into simulation. And as the consciousness comprises of restricting distortion, to remain in agreement with this consciousness, we are deciding to experience restriction, and this expresses as it does through a simulator that goes through its cycles to its inevitable implosion conclusion. The consciousness vehicles, in essence, will go down with the simulator, as the two are indivisible. It's just a case of, if we cling to the consciousness, remain in the houses when this takes place. And so this bulging and heaving of all consciousness representing houses is a feature now, I would suggest, that can be seen on the real side generally, a representation of this simulator in peril situation. But just like the darkness that shrouds the simulator, such phenomena of house bulging, for example, is unlikely to be seen through a consciousness that is programmed with deceptive filter overlaps, as it is rather a cyberspace consciousness of effected illusion, and to utilize that alone, absent of the real awareness view of what's really taking place. Much actuality of activity can be absent from our view. In addition are various other options that have been presented as real side possibilities. New simulators that can be transitioned to, as an example, for those who have the intent to continue their awareness process, but may be running out of time through the agreements that are spiraling the current simulator into a demise too rapidly. And again, such options and happenings may not be revealed to those who remain with the personal self-consciousness only, as they can only really see the affected simulation and its multi-dimensionality as according to the consciousness. And if it is another simulator being constructed as an example, this of course wouldn't be something that is affected from the current simulator's consciousness, as it would be in reality a completely different simulated arena with a completely different consciousness that generates it. And indeed, many created ideas that are constructed by the guides also, as the guides have not a consciousness that is a part of the consciousness that affects into this simulator overall arena, then what they create will not feature anywhere in it, but rather aside from it. Simulated, yes, but simulation that to access and enter you would rather need the ideas of it provided that you can effect your personal self into the simulation of the universities, for example, where they don't feature in the overall simulator arena that anyone can access, but are rather by special invite only, like special idea passes that the agreement with affords access to. And as I said, to be shown that which is then actually taking place in the simulator, aside from the manipulated consciousness view, and to see or access these additional simulated created ideas that are not a part of the overall simulator arena that effects from the consciousness. The representation would be that of leaving the personal self representing house, or at least looking out the windows. For as the group and I sat in the second floor bulging area of the house, the guide in my father's form would gesture out the window, and as we looked, so would we see first swirling galaxies, as though the house were almost moving through space, and then a selection of planets would appear. Interestingly, these were all the same planet, the planet Earth, multiple versions of it, numbering a good 20 or so. And as I was saying, there will always be options and opportunities, more so for those who have the real intent for overall is recognition. For simulation experience always must follow intent placement, and with an intent placed with the ears and maintained, what takes place in a creation will roll out to the actuality of that intent. This would include these various options that benefit this awareness process: relocation from planets on the brink of destruction, alternative simulators, if the real intent is embraced by the personal self, it is open agreement that these options will avail themselves, and then we must decide to take them or not. In this case, it was as though a selection of alternative planet Earths had been created, and perhaps each existing in their own respective frequency dimension, as really everything is present in this nowness moment. But from a personal, simulated perspective, it is the vehicles we inhabit that rather isolate parts of the entirety of creation into individual realms or dimensional positions that we experience. And so, to assume other dimensions creationally, dimensions we, awareness, already are standing in, it requires the awareness to simply move its containment view to a different vehicle, that these other dimensions can thus be experienced, like having an endless collection of virtual reality goggles with their corresponding games, and moving from one virtual reality set to the other. And my impressions were that this then represented a potential possibility for those with their personal intent placed with the real awareness is recognizing intent, that as things continue to deteriorate, as the earth becomes more polluted and non-conducive for the process of awareness to continue, that a possible relocation to these alternative earths, and whatever dimensions they resided in, may be so. I'm uncertain if these Earth alternatives were in this simulator still, which if so, would still be a simulator going into demise, but perhaps it would afford more time, as the Earth is getting somewhat perilously close to being destroyed, or at least becoming rather difficult to effectively operate on. And also my impressions were that each Earth planet had its own unique signature or essence about it, as though all were viable alternative options, but according to each individual and where they were on their respective awareness process, dictated which planet they would go to, a little like different grades at school in a sense. And it's entirely possible that even if the recognizing of the is hasn't been achieved, but a complete agreement, detachment from all ideas of the consciousness has been completed, then for such individuals they are not a tapline anchored to a deteriorating simulator through their consciousness that is a part of its effecting. They are at liberty to be moved to other simulators, or even perhaps other planet alternatives that are, yes, simulated and in creation, but simulation that is aside from the current simulator that is on the verge of collapse. For anything that features in the overall simulator arena is rather doomed to go down with it, and so these created options and alternatives, if they are aside from the simulator, they are constructed from ideas that do not stem from a consciousness that is a part of the overall consciousness that affects this overall simulator arena, and we could very readily visit these alternative planets and options aside from the current collapsing simulator, but as long as we retain any agreements to any of the ideas of the consciousness, this anchors and tethers us to this current simulator, and so should we need to evacuate to permanently transition to these simulated options, we need be untethered and tapline unshackled from the simulator we wish to depart from.
And most people are tethered because they're tap line, they're attached, because they're not really focused on survival, which the is. They're focused on some kind of good times or happiness or something that's really not part of the isness, but it's part of the creation or simulator. So if they're not into survival too, it's easier to manipulate them and control them too. And they just don't have the focus. So it's about survival. And I always like this quote, if it's something, it can't be everything. I think that's cool. If it's something, it can't be everything. So most people focus on something, God or love or something, freedom, which is something, but which are references, but they're not, it's not everything. So to get into the everything mode, you do have to go to this unknown area. And most people, they haven't even considered that there's something outside of what they know, or something outside of life, you could say, or creation. They really haven't considered it. Even just considering it is big for people. And then if they decide to investigate, or really sincerely want to see what's outside creation, the life will show them, like you said. But most people don't even consider that there's something else. I kind of did when I was younger. I remember I was a seeker type, so I was always looking for something else. And I thought I found it in the corporation and Ekankar and some of the other paths. And it is, you find things, you find a stability in these belief systems. It's really solid in a way. You're solidly self-convinced about something. But these are just basically stopover points. You gain your experiences, and then if you don't move on, then you are stuck in these things. And usually the way they turn out, they have their peak, and then they go into demise. That's just the cycle in creation. It's birth, maintenance or duration, and then demise or destruction. So that's like the cycle. But again, to get it beyond everything, yeah, it's a big journey to get beyond creation and what what you think is life is. And the last thing I jotted down here, freedom to move your awareness around is cool. Again, if you're tapline with an idea or if you're stuck with something, you're not able to move your awareness around because naturally it's just stuck in a certain point. It seems very simple. It is, it's simple and it's very subtle at the same time, but yeah, you can't, you have to untether yourself if you really want that freedom to move around with your real self, your real awareness. Otherwise you are beholden to your ideas about things or your considerations or your attitudes or your relationships, whatever. And real freedom is like, yeah, like the birds. You can just move around wherever you want, go wherever with your awareness, not necessarily with your physical body, but with your awareness. You can move around in creation, and then you can have the opportunity to recognize the real universes, the isness, your real self, your real awareness at the same time, and go back and forth like the real guides, living on the edge of creation and the real universes. Some of them do that, apparently. So pretty far out stuff, and let's see where this planet goes, where we go, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because when you were saying about being something, therefore it can't be everything, I hear a lot of people still making reference to these various planes, the 10th plane, the 14th heaven, etc., etc. And again, that's the same idea, isn't it? If it's something, if you've isolated something, if it's an idea that you've pinpointed, then it's an encapsulated, isolated thing, which can't be the everything that the is. So these individuals that focus on these 14th plane, 10th heaven, or whatever, they are in fact self-isolating themselves and locking themselves in ideas and references that, again, are keeping them aside from the is this everything that again can't be encapsulated by any idea, and certainly can't be encapsulated by notions of life levels and literal heavens and such.
Yeah, when I talk to people about, like Christians, I ask them if is God everything, and they usually say, yeah, everything. Well, then he's also to consider God is evil or God is whatever, I mean, the whole thing. But no, they're usually focused on something like God is love. But if God is everything, then how does that fit in? Well, it's the choice. People make choices, to be evil. Well, that's also everything, part of everything. Everything is everything. So it's very subtle for the mind to take in, but usually people don't see that subtlety, and they go from everything to something. They need something. They can't just do everything. It's too much. It's too much for us. So they do something, to isolate something, and then they focus on that, put emotion into it. So it's difficult to get to that point where, you just let go of something so you can better see, have the opportunities to see everything. You're not going to see everything, but you take it in steps and it'll start opening up. Everything will start opening up. But still, you can't hold on to it. It's not something you have, or because it's always new now. So you're always becoming more aware, and it's a dynamic process to it. So it's interesting the way it is, and it's not like we've been told. It's not what you think it is. So it's something you got to figure out. But like Dwayne says, you can't figure it out. So take it a step at a time, and decide you want to see more, and whatever you decide about it, and it'll show itself to you if you're sincere. And then do the new you, which we talk about. That'll tune you into it.
And also very briefly, when you were saying you were a seeker when in your younger days and such, I would describe myself as likewise. I mean, initially it would start off with seeking and accumulating vast quantities of knowledge and information, but I found at a certain point that all the information I was accruing was really very much second-hand information. You know, you were listening to the various individuals, like all these Davidite characters and these various spiritual gurus and masters and such, and it's all very interesting, and indeed a lot of it could well be accurate because they are going out there and exploring in their own ways, as limited or expansive as they might be. But I always found that having secondary information was never really enough for me. So I felt that, well, if they're getting the information and passing it to me, almost like as that way, then would it not make more sense to go directly to where this information lies? And that's where, instead of just doing that, the next stage for me was to actually go out and get and access the information that these individuals were theoretically, where they were sourcing it from. And that's where I would begin doing my astral projection activities, because I felt that, well, this must be where it's coming from, beyond the physical, other levels or dimensions, or I suppose back then the reference would be from spiritual planes or areas, whereas now we would know it's more individuals getting this information are simply accessing more of the multi-dimensional nature of creation and of themselves. And so that was the next stage for me, was to begin my own explorations. And it began, as I said, with my astral projections and out-of-body experiences. And I suppose if it wasn't for my coming across the new presentation, I would probably still be doing that to this day. And I'm not sure how that would have developed by now. I mean, it's very likely I would have got myself in all sorts of trouble. So I have shared how on a lot of these astral projection experiences, you do get a lot of attacks. You get bothered by a lot of characters. You can, they can interfere, they can attack you, they can sever your cord, etc. And even though I don't do astral projection so much now, but when they occasionally occur, which they sometimes do, I always now have the additional protection that I have through the real awareness I'm connected with, whereas prior to that, it would just be me with my personal self. And the only defense I had against these characters through my excursions on the astral planes were whatever I had by way of skills and abilities that were accessible in my current lifetime of memory references. And so obviously that's going to be far more limited, but with the real awareness, it can access everything and provide whatever means is necessary to extricate an individual from a predicament or to deal with a situation and such. But so as I said, that does seem to be a logical step for most people. They will start off listening to other people, then obviously it makes sense then to go and find their own answers, to, if nothing else, but to verify the information they're receiving, because there's so much information out there being supplied by various individuals, and a lot of it, there are common themes, but there was a lot of conflicting information as well, and a lot of contradictory information too. And so that was another reason why originally I set out to try and find answers. But to be perfectly honest, doing the astral projections, it didn't really provide any information. I mean, I'd go out and see very interesting places, rather exotic worlds throughout the astral planes, and meet all sorts of individuals. But again, the real source of information comes from the real awareness, because when I do my real side experience, when I have my real side experiences, I have all this visual stuff that's going on through my personal self, but it's only through these real awareness impressions that, as it is through all consciousness, it can read everything throughout it and all the ideas that the consciousness consists of. And it is through that real awareness that you really get the real information of what's happening. And it can get to the extent where you can have real side experiences where very little is actually happening, and you're just being fed this constant stream of impressions that then your personal self has to, as best it can, make sense of and relate later. But as I said, the real source of the information is your real awareness. And it can even get to the extent then that indeed real side experiences would not be necessary at all. So if you have this open connection and channel with the real awareness that you are, and you stand in the nowness of that reality, then you'd be in a constant state where it would provide you with impressions of everything you need to know at every moment, on the real side and on the physical. So it's quite interesting how goes.
It's very unique the way you yourself get there. Yeah, yeah. That's what's so cool about it.
Okay, well, this last experience then is quite a short one. I related it before, and I put it out as a video, and I titled it "World Tapliners." This only about 5 minutes, but it was originally a galactic dream. I wouldn't have said it was really galactic in its nature, but nevertheless, that's where I originally shared it, and so I'll share it here again. World Tapliners. In this real side experience, I would be afforded a view of a street. It could have been any street really. The location wasn't that important, though I had the sense it was UK based. As I looked on, I would see on every house in this street, and perhaps even houses and streets beyond my view here, a huge dragon perched on the roofs. I say perched, but it was more that it was a part of the roof of each house, as though moulded into it and attached in some way. My view would switch, and I would visit several of these houses, and within I would find the owner of each house was present and located on the upstairs, the top floors of each home. What was curious was this: the dragons attached to the roofs had snake-like appendages stemming from their bodies that crept in through the roofs they were upon, and had each house owner bound with them. The appendages were not so much wrapped around the individuals, more that they were latched onto them, inserted into their very bodies, and so a very apparent indication of taplining from reptilians, represented by these large dragons. I suppose the reason for the reptilians being in such large dragonic forms was the extent of the taplining, how huge the agreements were that allowed this taplining to be so, and being on the top floors of their houses indicated the taplining taking place from the unseen parts of their personal selves, which would be, for these evidently unaware people, anything from the astral on up, literally speaking, so probably emotional, astral, mental and subconscious agreement taplines. For these individuals seemed oblivious of these appendage-like taplinings that were latched onto them, and it's interesting how the dragons were equally as bound and attached to the houses, to the individuals they had garnered agreement from and taplined. For of course these reptilians were limiting and restricting themselves to a creation also, even though they present as the controllers through their decisions and choices. They are as much controlled as those they impose control over. Reptilians
who like to be controlled and influenced so that they can control others, but everybody rather stuck and interwoven with each other through all the agreements that entangle them, embroiled in the cause and effect karma of those they have claimed agreement from, and now these reptilian controllers are rather stuck with all their entanglements and will have to deal with all these individuals in the lifetimes to come. As I entered each of these houses, the dragon appendages would snake toward me as though automatically, and I would bat them away, for yes, I would recognize and perceive what was going on, and naturally then I would be in the real awareness position to better decide as to my taplines or not, and these dragons certainly were not having my agreement.
You took care of those guys. Do you find that, how do you come up with so-called defense or countering, opposition or confrontation? How do you usually like come up with something? It just kind of you just see it, or how do you handle confrontation on the real side? Yeah.
Well, we always decide our experience, and so if we're coming up, and so I mean, confrontation will always take place, because as we go onto the real side, we're obviously entering an overall simulated arena that we all share, because our consciousness is a part of all consciousness that affects it. And so we will, as we encounter these individuals, we are encountering them according to how they have decided their consciousness to be, according to the construction of the ideas they have decided and formulated it as. And so it would be a case of, as you go around the real side, you're going to be constantly bumping into these self-programmed consciousnesses, and they'll be of various inclinations and intents. A little like if you play a computer game, really. You enter a computer game and there'll be all these various characters, and all of them will be programmed in different ways. Some will be antagonists, some will be more passive, and they will interact with you according to their decided consciousness. But what dictates their ability to be able to then impose their decided consciousness upon you, if they are abrasively inclined, would be again based on your decision, because with the simulation being exactly as you decided, therefore how can anything attack you or dominate you or control you unless you have agreed this can be so? It's quite interesting how it is. It's almost as though all consciousness, even though that it is individual consciousness constructions according, and the construct of each consciousness is according to the individual, it's as though there are also agreements between all the overall consciousness, between the individual consciousness units, almost like shared files, which dictate the extent and ability of each individual to be able to impact upon others. And so these are almost like, it's almost like for every individual you encounter, there will be agreements either made on the spot, or there will be subconscious agreements that have been made lifetimes prior. And these are almost like two computer programs coming into conjunction and almost deciding between themselves exactly how they will be in relation to each other. And so so basically, if you're finding yourself attacked on the real side, if you find yourself successfully being attacked on the real side, there are agreements with the individual who is attacking you to allow that they can successfully do so. And again, most people would not consciously decide to be successfully attacked by another. So more likely as not, these are agreements that have been secured subconsciously from previous lifetimes, and who knows under what circumstances. I mean, if somebody wants to successfully attack somebody else, they've got to somehow convince them in some shape or form that this would be beneficial for the target, and therefore they accept this is so, and therefore it becomes their shared reality. And broadly speaking, this is what the controllers do in their marketing ploy. They market something as being beneficial, but it's actually the intent behind it and their consciousness construct which generates it, and all their ideas they create is that of wanting to control and dominate the individual. And so they put forth something that looks beneficial. The individual agrees with it, but what they don't realize is they're agreeing with the entire package of the intent and consciousness behind it. And so they have effectively agreed to being controlled by an individual. And this is then an agreement contract between the two consciousnesses. And this then plays out accordingly, where the individual now finds this character they have agreed to, which was a beneficial surface idea, has now facilitated and allowed that this individual can now impact them adversely, and they will find themselves then successfully attacked on the physical and the real side. And so the whole idea, this process of awareness, is as we go through the personal self and release all these agreements. These would include the agreements with all these various characters which allow their ability to control and dominate us and have a power over us. And so as these are severed one by one, these then are these agreement contracts being removed, which then negates their ability to attack us. I mean, they will still attack us, because if that is their consciousness construct and general intent inclination, they will do as according to their consciousness, because it's almost like unconscious programs running around just playing out their decided way of how they've constructed their consciousness. And so they will do as their consciousness dictates almost, and so they will attack us according to their consciousness, but now they no longer can successfully do so. And so when it comes to how you deal with these individuals, it's not really that you're having to deal with them at all. It's simply that you're removing their ability to be able to impact you adversely. And so as you continue through this process, so you find yourself becoming more and more invincible in a way on the real side. And as I said, there's always, and so the only thing, and so really with the real awareness, as you stand in the nowness of its reality on the real side, it will always provide you the means by which you can deal with any individual or any situation. And the only reason it wouldn't be able to deal with any individual or situation would be if the personal self is still holding on to agreements that allows these situations to be that which we can't handle, or that allow these individuals to still have power over us, and therefore we can't deal with them. And so in such situations where we come up across individuals, what's happening then, if they are successfully attacking us, the real awareness can do nothing about it, because the personal self is maintaining agreement that they can attack us successfully. And so the personal self is deciding to experience that through its free will, effectively. And the real awareness can do nothing about that. So what we can do in such situations as that is you can sort of just step out of the step from the consciousness of the personal self, which then removes you from the situation, and you can be extracted from the real side. You can be extracted from the real side situation and simply removed from it. Whereas most people who don't have the real awareness connection, they're rather stuck with their situations, and they have to just go through it and be attacked by these characters. There's nothing they can do about it. And so I said, on the real side, it's not so much that you're consciously thinking, how do I deal with this individual? What skills will I bring to bear? What will I do next? It's almost as though with the connection with the real awareness, protection is automatic, and the real awareness will just provide the means by which you can be safe. But again, that will be in accordance with the extent to which it is allowed to operate and that will be depending. That'll be dependent on the agreements with the personal self in regards to these individuals and attackers, and so and that's the problem. That's the problem on the physical level, because on the real side, you can be extracted from the simulated situation if it's something you can't handle, because there's agreement still to be released that makes a situation or an individual that you can't handle. But the problem with the physical level is you can't be extracted from the simulation, because you don't have that option, because you're as long as you're in the while you're on the physical level, you're constantly in the simulation. And so if there are agreements that allow individuals to successfully attack you or situations you can't handle, then you're rather stuck with those situations. And so you don't have the option where you can be removed from the simulation. I mean, I suppose in a very extreme case, the real awareness could pull the plug, as it were. I mean, I have seen real side experiences where situations get so dire on the earth that the real awareness just drops the physical vehicle, because it makes no sense to be maintained in that situation. And so technically that would be a way of extraction if it doesn't make sense to go through the experience. But so yeah, so in a very long, convoluted way, when it comes to this protection on the real side, it's automatic through the real awareness, but that is also dependent on the agreements through the personal self that still being held to, and according to individuals, we can't. As I said, the other option is always then the real awareness just pulls the personal self out of the simulated situation. And so, and then obviously these taplines and these agreements have to be faced eventually. And a lot of times with these experiences, if we go through them, we have then a far greater richness of experience to share. Whereas if we just saw something that was an adverse situation and we just simply sidestepped around it, it wouldn't be much of a tale to tell. But if we go through it in all its graphic detail, then we have a lot of stuff we can then share. And as I said, and the more intense sometimes experiences are, particularly when you get attacked, the more they're likely to stick in the memory on waking. And so there's all sorts of factors involved, but I think that possibly answers your question.
Yeah. No, I see the real awareness really can't be harmed. It's the personal self that can be, influenced and harmed and tortured and hurt, etc. But the real awareness really is beyond creation, and it's just it's an isness still. You can be unaware, but you really can't be harmed in your real self. But you can be unaware, and you can, be in the position where you don't recognize that, or you don't recognize reality. You just recognize your personal self, if that, and that's limited, and that's where you get into really a lot of challenges. So anyway, thank you, Kevin. That was great. It was fun. Thank you very much for all that.
Yeah, I was going to add very briefly that if it's ideas that affect simulation, and so if our experiences are adverse, these must stem from agreements to ideas that are adverse then in their nature. With the real awareness and the isness, there are no ideas to be found there. So there's nothing that can be affected into adverse situations with the real awareness and the isness, because it's a reality where no ideas exist. And ideas only exist in creation. It's only there where they can be experienced. And so the real awareness is aside from anything that can present as situations such as being attacked, because there are no ideas that exist in the true reality.
Yeah, good point. That's good. That's very good. New you. Thanks for joining us. This was the new Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show, January 23rd, 2022. See you next time.